Hey guys, huge shout out to Kaden as usual. Be sure to go check out his latest video in which he breaks down the timeline of the Kadenverse. Link will be in the description below. They say war is hell. Well, I've been to hell. I've been to war too. I can honestly say that war is worse for many reasons, but one in particular comes to mind. It's like that guy on MASH said, there are no innocents in hell. I say that like I wasn't taken down to hell against the wishes of heaven. I wasn't an innocent man though. I'd done plenty bad. Just in service of the right side, I guess. Good and evil is such a trivial thing. My point is that I've seen hell. I've seen war. I've seen war in hell. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Stone. I am a lot of things. A former CIA agent, a soldier, a weapon, a husband, and most importantly, a father. I have fought in the Shadow Wars, multiverse fighting tournaments, and a rebellion in hell. I've fought, I've killed, I've tortured, I've died, I've rebelled, and I've loved. I've gotten an overabundance of the best and worst of the human experience. And after all of it, I feel like I have the right to say, war is worse than hell, and war with hell is worse than anything. Father Time's Keeper army was millions strong. It had a fleet of ships that could take and hold entire universes. It had an assortment of task forces and shock troops called exterminators. Think of a mixture of space marines and Spartans from Halo. It had a network of intelligence gatherers called loggers. Then they had the basic troops. The Keepers also had the backing of Heaven's military might, which included the Heavenly Host, the Horsemen, the Seraphim, and the 9th Roman Legion. You may be thinking that it's a vast military force. And it is. But when you have to fight for an entire multiverse, no matter what the size of your forces are, you will become spread thin. Our forward operating base into the multiverse was Earth 0067. The whole planet was a massive military installation for the Keepers. One that was protected by a unit that had become collectively known as the Damned. This unit was comprised of the escapees of the Helion Rebellion, all men and women who had escaped their ultimate fate and had been stuffed into bodies that were made to be tortured. These bodies could heal from any kind of wound not given to them by holy weapons. But therein lay the problem. The kind of weapon that Hell specialized in using is the exact kind of weaponry required to kill those said people, which was why they had been reduced to more of a rear guard. A guard for Earth 0067. They were well armed. Keeper weaponry was the most advanced in the multiverse. The planet was also to host a unit of exterminator trainees, those going through the final phases of their shock troop training before they'd be deployed to another Earth to battle the hordes of hell. Why am I summarizing all of this up? Well, I just want you to have an idea of what exactly our forces consisted of during the event that has been referred to by Keeper Command as Judgment Day. I'd gotten used to a routine on Earth 0067. I'd wake up and have breakfast with my wife and daughter. Then I'd shower and put on my uniform. Then head on to Central Command. The day before the attack had gone exactly like this, aside from my daughter being present, as she was on Earth Prime running an undercover operation with the ISDD. She'd left while I've been deployed on a mission with the Hell Hunters. I'd left home after breakfast and made my way to the command building, which was a massive metal skyscraper that also held the planet's shield generator. I suppose I should tell you a bit more about how Earth 0067 was set up. Humanity on this Earth was wiped out in the Bronze Age by a blight. All the humans currently on this planet were either from Earth Prime or other various Earths in the multiverse. The planet only had one major city. The Keeper FOB took up the entirety of the North American continent and most of the Central American continent. Travel wasn't an issue because everyone had teleporters or could teleport using various magical abilities. Now, these teleporters were good for teleporting on the planet, not multiversal travel. Multiversal travel could only be achieved through one of our fleet ships or the massive monolithic portal in the command building. The rest of the planet was used for its resources, be it minerals, farming, or just resort-style areas to take breaks in. I can remember arriving at the command building. I walked inside through the front door, where I was greeted by Royce and Marcus. They had been standing at the entrance to the Grand Hall, awaiting my arrival. The Grand Hall was where Keeper Command and representatives from Heaven met to discuss war updates and plan operations. It's where Gabriel and Michael offered me my enhanced body. Marcus shook my hand. Royce nodded. "David, I hear your daughter is on an undercover op," Marcus said. "I don't know the exact details, other than it involves a cult at a high school," I admitted. Marcus nodded as he led us through the sliding glass door. Inside, Kane was at the main podium while the representatives from various factions took their seats around him. Behind Kane was a screen, one that displayed Earth 1001. "Good morning, everyone," Kane started. "As you all know, Abaddon has changed his tactics again recently. The Earths he invades have no longer been using nuclear weapons to wipe each other out. They've been using Lazarus. But you're well aware of this. Well, one of our loggers just recorded this about 2 Earth Prime days ago. It seems Hell's newest general has been busy." I knew the general he mentioned. He was a former Angel gone rogue, one who had been killed by the ISDD. He called himself Victor. He hit a button and the screen changed. There was an image of an obsidian pyramid that had planted itself in a field. This thing was as large as Lilith's tomb had been, which was almost as tall as a mountain. At the base of said pyramid was an opening where hordes of crawlers were flooding inside. I watched thousands upon thousands make their way inside. The camera zoomed in. There weren't just crawlers going inside, but infected bugs as well. There were wasps the size of large dogs, massive spider creatures that reminded me of the ones Lilith brought to Crawford. Once the horde was inside the pyramid, the opening shut and the pyramid lifted up into the sky and vanished. "How many?" asked a voice. "How many what?" "How many of those things got inside the pyramid?" 2 million and some change," Kane said as he clicked the button. Another pyramid appeared, this one in a city, still on Earth 1001. This one as well, and this one, and this one. The images flipped to more pyramids on that particular Earth. Our best guess is that Abaddon has created a planet-sized army of Lazarus infected, and this isn't the only one he's amassed. And this isn't the only threat, said Kane. Ever since he gained Dagon's powers, we've been hearing rumors of some kind of super creature. It's been kind of problematic as we've been having some difficulty locating it. That is, until now. This was taken on Earth 0032. He clicked the button again. On the screen appeared a massive green serpent that was towering over the NYC skyline. This thing was so large you could see it from space. Its body went on for 20 to 30 miles. Its head was eel-like and as tall as a skyscraper. Its scaly body had narrow spines that ran down its back, and its mouth had teeth that were the size of buildings. "What is that?" I heard someone else asked. "A leviathan. A full-grown leviathan. They're thought to be extinct, other than the spawn in Gehenna. But those don't grow this large. They're only maybe 60 feet. This is 32 miles. It looks like Abaddon's been busy." The creature reared its massive head up and vomited a literal flood of acid that melted away entire buildings. I felt myself tense up. Kane sighed. "Then there are the new shock troops," he said as he clicked the button again. On it was an image of an army information. An army that looked very, very human. They wore crude-looking black mechanical suits with circular eyes that glowed a red color. They were also equipped with some kind of energy rifles. "This is Abaddon's new guard. They're all Omega soldiers, or they would be if they had souls. They're all humans from alternate Earths who were given Abaddon's Omega serum. Their corpses were revived, but their bodies have been taken over, possessed. We knew this was coming, but we didn't think it would happen this fast. Abaddon now has an army he could potentially invade Earth Prime with." The room went dead silent. I could see the look on Marcus's face was unbearably serious. Kane stepped to the side. That was when the Archangel, Gabriel, took the stage. There are a few things we can do. They won't be able to move on Earth Prime with the moon base shield up. We have put warding in place to severely limit teleportation inside of said shield as well. We should call our forces back to Earth Prime, I heard one voice said. Gabriel nodded. I agree, but that's easier said than done. The base on Earth Prime has limited space. The 9th is already there. With that, Gabriel announced plans to slowly start pulling our forces back to Earth Prime. Not much was going to change on 0067, however. There was an idea floated around to use it as a staging area to teleport forces back to Earth Prime if needed. After the meeting, Marcus gathered the Hell Hunters. We found ourselves meeting Marcus and Maxis, the Primus Pilus of the 9th Roman Legion, in the Fleet Bay. Marcus had only recently become a horseman. He had also taken the role of General of the 9th since the former General Quintus had died. A role I'm not sure he wanted. I knew Marcus. He liked leading, but he was better at leading teams than armies. He looked around at us. Royce, Circe, Wukong, and Jericho stood with us. Are you here to announce your retirement? Jericho asked. Marcus shook his head. There are going to be some changes. Yes, I have other duties I must attend. So as of this moment, Royce will be taking charge of the Hell Hunters, he said. We'd all seen it coming. Royce had been with the Keepers longer than Marcus. It made sense. What about you? Off to be general? Asked Wukong. Marcus shrugged. Off to be a horseman. It's been an honor. It really has. I'm off to Earth Prime with Kane. I could tell that there was a sense of pride amongst us, but also a tinge of sadness. No one wanted to see Marcus go, but we knew this was the next step for him. Marcus shook Wukong's hand, then Circe's, then Jericho, then Royce. Then he stopped when he got to me. I'd ask if you wanted to come with me, to see your daughter. Anna needs to finish rehabilitating the rest of the damned, maybe sometime soon. Marcus smiled. Fair enough, he said as he shook my hand. I knew this wasn't the last time we'd see each other, but still, I wouldn't say I liked goodbyes. He and Maxis would leave. Royce and I would start to make plans to find an additional member. The rest of the day went by quickly. We weren't going to be running any operations for a while, not until we had more information about Aberon's new army. I sat in for some training drills where a Keeper drill sergeant by the name of Demos was instructing the executioners on how to take out a Gehennian Knight. Gehennian Knights were a higher class of demon, being maybe 15 feet tall and armored as hell. They had served in the actual Gehennian military for eons. I'd fought several on various Earths that hell could actually bring its army to. Demos had a head full of graying hair and a cybernetic arm. He was as gruff and soldier-esque as they came. They've got armor that's resistant to most of our plasma-based weaponry, but that armor has its own weaknesses. Here, he pointed to the dummy's belly button. Here, he pointed at the throat. And here, he pointed at the thing's crotch. This got some laughs from the class. Demos wasn't amused. You laugh now, but these things can move in the blink of an eye. They're already hard to hit as it is. Count yourself lucky there is only 1 out of every 1,000 demons with this rank. I looked at the recruits and wondered what some of them had been before they'd been taken in by the Keepers. Most of these men had already gone through their surgical and mechanical enhancements. They were on average 7 to 9 feet tall. Demos was 11 feet tall in his armor. I watched some more when I heard a voice from next to me. They're confident, Father Time said. They have to be. I turned to him. He had a sad look about him, sadder than usual, that is. I take it you have some kind of news? He exhaled. Something like that. Are you going to share? I asked. I have to leave for a while. Yahweh's orders. Why? He looked at me with a sad smile. That I can't reveal. Just know that some battles you'll have to win on your own. I took a deep breath. He was trying to warn me, but he was being unnecessarily vague. There's a fight coming, isn't there? What's the point of being able to see the future if you're not allowed to warn people about it? I asked. Plot convenience mostly, Wukong said from behind me. I turned and looked at him with a raised brow. Sorry, I've been spending too much time with chat on Earth Prime. Is that where you were last weekend? I asked. Yeah, we were watching Attack on Titan. He said it reminded him of a battle they fought in Norway. I rolled my eyes as I turned back to where Father Time was standing. He smiled softly at me. There's a fight coming, David. A bad one, he said, before vanishing. I sighed as I turned back to Wukong. I'd actually been waiting for him, as he was supposed to have dinner with Anna and I that evening. We walked toward one of the teleporters, one that would take us to my apartment building. We'd been given a penthouse on the East Coast. I'd find myself often watching the sunrise over the ocean with Anna. It was beautiful. Wukong and I made small talk as I activated the teleporter. The metallic sphere cylinder was about as tall as we were. It scanned me before opening up. Designation: Keeper Captain David Stone. Location: Building 4000. A robotic voice said. I still don't get it, man. He seems like he's slowly losing his mind, I said. Truthfully, it had felt like that ever since the tournament. Father Time had become more and more vague with his predictions. He'd removed himself from council meetings and spent way more time sequestered in his collection of offices and libraries. It bothered me. He has a lot on his plate, being a primordial and all. I'm sure it's taxing controlling the flow of time, Wukong said. I stepped into the teleporter. There was a bright blue flash. Then I stepped out of a teleporter in the lobby of my apartment building. I turned to see Wukong step out from it as well. And he keeps blaming Yahweh for his vagueness. I don't get it. If the primordials want us to win so badly, why does it seem like they're against us? Wukong thought for a moment. Have you ever heard the story of how I was imprisoned by the Buddha? I thought for a moment. I'd heard the story in college. He challenged you to jump over his palm. You failed, so he imprisoned you. That's the one. Do you know why? I don't remember, I admitted. Because I had a problem with authority. The Jade Emperor and I had somewhat of a distaste for each other. Or so I thought. I remember thinking a lot during my imprisonment about how I would take my vengeance on him when I got out. If I got out. How the Buddha had forced me to play a rigged game. How I had been cheated. Then I did get out. I got out and had to make that journey to the west. Heh, it wasn't anything like the book. But I digress. That journey taught me more than thousands of years of being a trickster ever did. I learned patience. I learned forgiveness. I learned the lesson the Buddha and the Jade Emperor had been trying to teach me. And what was that? I asked. It's not about me. He took another sad sigh. Of course. And then Lilith showed up and ruined everything. I had it all. A family, a people, a kingdom, and I lost it because of her. But you and the Keepers helped me get it back, and I got to watch her get her head blown off. I can't help but wonder if it was all for a reason. We made our way into my apartment, where Anna was busy pulling something that smelled awesome from the oven. What is that? Wukong said as we walked in. That is a baked chicken casserole, Anna said as she put the dish on the counter. Anna had been cooking constantly lately, and never the same thing twice. I guess when you spent your living days as a vampire and only drinking blood, becoming human and eating human food must have been quite the experience. It was as if she'd wanted to try everything she could. We sat down and ate dinner. Wukong had come by to discuss some issues he'd been having with some of his people getting in trouble in one of the mining districts. A lot of Wukong's species had gotten jobs working for the Keepers at various facilities. They were hard workers with good work ethics. Well, most of them were. There were some youths who were particularly rowdy, specifically in the mining district. Wukong was convinced that it was because the master of the mines, Keeper Iroh, had a problem with them. After some discussion, Anna, who had become a workers' representative after helping rehabilitate most of the damned, told them she would go see Iroh in the morning to try and get to the bottom of what exactly was going on, which meant she would have to leave early the next morning. Wukong would eventually leave. Anna and I cleaned up. She was doing dishes while I wiped off our kitchen table. Have you been keeping tabs on Grace? she asked. It's her first day of fake school. She couldn't have gotten into much trouble yet, I said. Anna laughed. Grayson's mission update said she and Owen burned to possess people too. I think the words he used were a fucking crisp, she said. I laughed. She is my kid. I could hear Anna sigh. I hope their mission goes quickly. I miss her. I smiled as I approached my wife and hugged her. I know. I do too. She kissed me, and we went to bed together. I don't want to get into the specifics of making love while having a non-carbon-based body, but if it works and feels real, then it works and feels real. I woke up the next morning around sunrise. Anna had already left for work. I didn't need to be anywhere for a few hours. I went and showered, then put on my uniform before going to walk onto our balcony. I could see the sun still rising over the ocean. It was beautiful. The pink and purple streaks in the sky, the dancing of the waves. It was a serene moment. Then came the alarm, blaring in the distance. I'd already had my uniform on. I turned and walked inside, pulling a small electronic device from my belt. This device was, for lack of a better term, a futuristic cell phone. Computer, what's that alarm? I asked it. Dead body reported in Sector 10. A robotic voice replied. That made me raise a brow. Why would a dead body cause an alarm like that to go off? Whose body was it? Unknown. Cause of death? Unknown. You're less helpful than Siri, you know that? I said as I started dialing a number. A holographic screen of Royce popped up. Hey, did you get a notification about an alarm? I asked. Royce nodded. Yeah, I'm watching the drone feed now, sending it your way. Half the screen morphed, and now I was suddenly staring at, well, a dead body. A dead exterminator by the looks of it. Now, we weren't a police force. It wasn't our job to investigate murders. 0067 had people for that. The man's grey armor looked as if it had been ripped apart. His body was mangled like some kind of animal had attacked him. He had massive dents and burn marks all over his torso, and his intestines were on display for the world to see. He was being carried out via stretcher. That explains the alarms, I said. Are the computers running demonic energy scans? I asked. Royce nodded. They never stopped. What could have done this? Royce sighed. I don't know. I took a deep breath when it hit me. Does anyone know what Jericho was doing last night? I asked. I could see Royce's face falter a bit. Get to base. I'll see you soon, he said. About 15 minutes later, we had Jericho sitting across from both Royce and I in an interrogation room. Jericho was his usual self, all smiles and hardly any appreciation for the implication of what was going on. What were you doing last night? Royce asked. I was celebrating. Why? Did Talk celebrate too? I asked, referencing the demon that was living inside of him. No? Jericho asked. I showed him the picture of the body. What's that look like to you? I asked. Jericho looked at it for a second, then he hung his head before groaning. He suddenly morphed into his more demon-like form. I could feel my muscles tense up at this. I wasn't sure if he wanted to try and fight his way out. The demon, Talk, had red skin and two ebony black horns protruding from his forehead. He looked at the image and then eyed me. That looks like a banshee attack, it said in a deep, gravely voice. A banshee? Yes. That's impossible. That would have set off our demon detectors, Roy said. I don't mean the mythological creature. Those are extinct. I mean the mercenaries. Who? I asked. Talk took a deep, irritated breath. They're a rogue group, one mostly comprised of the children of rogue gods and rogue lightbenders. They travel from Earth to Earth and make contracts with various other beings to cause havoc, usually helping to win wars. And how do you know it's them? I asked. Because I used to work with them, and they left this at my door last night, he said, as he produced a card that had an image of a man getting a blood eagle. This is the calling card of their second-in-command, Edwin Thorson, Bastard son of Thor from Earth Prime, banished from the pantheons of old for being too brutal. That's rich, isn't it? He placed the card down. Royce and I looked at each other, both unsure of whether or not we could trust him. He had been my first thought because of this demon form being exempt from our systems. Talk seemed to pick up on this. Come on, Stone. Do you think I'd start killing now? If I wanted blood, I'd have started months ago. Aberon didn't have an army capable of taking Earth Prime months ago, Roy said. I hate Aberon more than you do. I have no loyalty to him. Say we do believe you. How do we find these banshees? Look into the keeper who was killed. He probably had something they wanted. Royce took a deep breath. Computer, show me the exterminator's file. A holographic image of the exterminator popped up. His title was Exterminator Sergeant Black. He was one of the exterminators tasked with guarding the Capitol building, where the shield generators for the planet were located. This made my eyes go wide, especially seeing that Sergeant Black's next detail was the entrance to the shield generator on the lower level. Shit, I said as I got up from my chair. We were in the Capitol building. Royce put his hand to the comm device in his ear. Captain Lazard, you read me? No response. Captain Lazard? No response. I need all security units to get to the shield generators. He barked into his comm link. The three of us stormed out of the interrogation room and into the hallway. Wukong and Sirs were waiting. What's going on? Sirs asked. Trouble, I replied. We made it to the massive vault-style door. It was semi-opened and spattered with sprays of blood. There were several dead exterminators on the ground. Several more exterminators arrived around the same time we did. I was first inside, followed by Royce and Talk. If anyone comes out that isn't us, blow their asses to hell, Royce commanded. The shield generators were massive silver boxes that were connected to tubes that led up through the ceiling. The room was large, about the size of a basketball court. The 4 silver boxes sat in the center. There were controls along the wall. It was at these controls that we found the assailant. He was a massive, red-headed man in what looked like tattered bronze Atlantean armor. He had a hammer that was crackling with blue lightning raised. Wait! Royce shouted. He didn't. He brought his hammer down hard onto the shield controls. There was an explosion and a bolt of lightning. Everyone aside from myself was blown off of their feet by the energy surge. When the dust cleared, people were getting to their feet. Edwin had vanished, teleported away no doubt. The shield generator had been completely destroyed, scorched to a crisp and smashed. I looked at Royce, who had a shocked look in his eyes. He put his finger to his comm device. This is Keeper Royce. The shields are down. I repeat, the shields are down. This is Gabriel. All units, report to the command center. We made our way to the command room, where Gabriel stood with the highest ranking general in the Keeper army, General Argyle, or one of the General Argyles. He was the only being on site who had like 4 different multiversal versions wandering around the Keeper organization. Gabriel had a very serious look in his eyes. Captain Demos was there as well. The shields are down, Roy said. We know, Gabriel said. Our deep space scans just picked up on something, Argyle said while pressing a button on a remote. The screen at the back of the chamber showed an image of several black pyramids drifting among the stars, a massive serpent swirling around them. I could feel my chest shudder. We need to evacuate, I said. We don't have time. That, and there are a good number of people on this planet that can't be taken to Earth Prime. I thought of my wife. She'd been one of the few of the damned granted a new body. She could leave, but she felt a responsibility toward the damned. We both did. I exhaled. So we evacuate them to another Earth, I said. Gabriel nodded, but still had an uncertain look in his eyes. I raised a brow. The easiest thing to do would be to kill their bodies and send their souls to heaven, said Argyle. What the fuck? Kill them? I all but growled under my breath. Gabriel sighed. Unfortunately, he's right. Those things will be here in less than 3 hours. It would take that long just to calibrate the portal to go to Earth 0124. We only have 20 ships on site. That isn't enough. But they'd die again, I said. 20,000 damned on this planet would go to heaven. Or you could let us fight. My wife's voice echoed. Everyone turned and looked at her. We all have a bone to pick with hell, she said. I walked straight up to her. She had a look in her eyes, one that screamed that she wouldn't be denied. What are you doing? I asked. There are innocent people on this planet, people that deserve to go home, she said to me. She was right, of course, but I didn't want to lose her, not again. This was a dangerous gamble. We both knew I wanted her to leave. I was about to say something else when Gabriel interrupted me. Let's focus on getting the evacuation started. We can send as many to Earth Prime as possible through the portal. But like we said, it's going to take a while to evacuate those who we can. With that being said, get ready for a fight. I was silent for the next hour while we prepped our defenses. We moved everyone back to the city. We knew the pyramids were coming fast. The problem with facing an enemy from orbit was that the walls wouldn't protect us. We had our fleet. We knew that combat was going to be a clusterfuck. We had ships from the fleet that were roaming the skies. They were the first line of defense. On the ground, we had an assortment of plasma cannons and artillery, anti-air defenses for this exact scenario. We also had an assortment of ground vehicles, 7 Hellcats, 4 Devastators, and an assortment of troop carriers, all of which were operated by the damned. Those were stationed at the command tower, which was what we figured the main target would be. That was where we stationed the majority of our forces. The trainee exterminators were stationed inside the building, while the damned created a perimeter in the surrounding buildings. It was a simple defense, really. Our forces numbered around 30,000. Not nearly enough to hold the planet. It was enough to take a defensive position in the capital area of the city. The evacuation was chaotic. Every single person through the portal had to be checked. We couldn't risk accidentally sending an undercover member of the Banshees to our moon base. The checks were simple, a simple scan, but it made the process take longer. I can remember hovering over the massive horde of civilians that were outside of the tower. Royce was in the ship above me with the rest of the Hellhunters. We had been given an assignment. We had to go and find the Banshees. I'd theorized that they would either try and get into the portal, or they'd try to sabotage our defenses. We were scanning the crowd for Edwin Thorson, or any energy signatures matching someone with electrokinesis. My thoughts rested on my wife. I didn't want to lose her. Not again. I remembered when she died on Earth Prime. I'd remembered Jackson's blade erupting from her chest, her hot blood running down my face, the scream that had hitched in my throat. We're not getting anything in the crowd, Roy said. That doesn't mean they're not here, I said. I know, but this is Eagle 6. We've got what looks like a kill squad staging in the southern quadrant, Sector 14. I turned and looked at the ship. I could see Royce and Wukong both watching me. Let's go, I said. Sector 14 of the city was in what was on most Earths the state of Florida. Eagle 6 was a squad of the damned stationed at a compound that operated some of the anti-air guns, which were these massive plasma cannons. They looked like turrets on a battleship, but 4 times bigger, and were posted on the roof of the 4-story compound. The area surrounding the compound was mostly flat. It was maybe 100 yards from the actual city and resting on the beach. I was inside the ship when we flew by. I could see the water gently swaying. Our ship hovered over the compound. I could see the 60 to 70 man crew taking their positions at the walls surrounding the building. Eagle 6, this is Royce. We are above you. We ran a scan for the kill squad, finding 15 to 20 fully armed men in the buildings closest to the compound. Our scanners detected that they were all armed with Atlantean tech. They also detected another thing, electrokinesis. I've got a potential ID on Edwin Thorson, Wukong said. Alright, David, we need to take Thorson alive. What about the rest of them? Fuck him. I'm on it. I exited the ship through the now open walkway. The Banshees had set up in the outer sector. We weren't exactly sure why. The ship had been cloaked, but it was still noisy as it traveled through the air. I was not. We were over 1,000 feet in the air when I left the ship. I could see their shooters in the windows, watching the compound. I narrowed my eyes, powering my optic beams up. The 2 golden beams of energy cut through the concrete building like butter. I used it to cut the top front corner of the 2-story building off. The shooters in the windows didn't get the chance to respond as the front of the building collapsed around them. I lowered myself into the opening. Several of Edwin's men had Atlantean rifles aimed at me. Edwin stood there with his hammer over his shoulder. He glared at me. "Kill him," he ordered. His Banshees opened fire. I blitzed forward, straight at Edwin, slamming into him hard. We both went flying out the opposite wall, bouncing and tumbling into an empty city street. I could hear the ship lowering down and firing its plasma cannons behind me. That wasn't my focus though. My focus lay on the pissed off demigod standing in front of me. Lightning crackled around his hammer. "You won't win this fight, Thorson. Drop the hammer," I commanded. "I'm gonna drop you first," he snarled as he blitzed toward me. He brought his hammer down hard. I took a step to the side and decked him in the face with a glowing fist. This made him angrier. He brought his hammer up in a follow-up swing. I dodged it as well, then fired my optic beams into his chest. This sent him tumbling back into another building. "Don't let him get away," Royce commanded. A blue bolt of lightning came down on top of the building he'd been thrown into. Then, another came down behind me. I turned just as the hammer whacked me in the face. It was now my turn to go flying. Only, I flew down the street, rolling and tumbling until I brought myself to a stop. But the moment I did, Thorson was on me again, jumping into the air with his hammer coming down hard. I was more annoyed than anything at this point. I shot to my feet and caught his hammer right under the head. My optic beams charged up and nailed him in the chest. He hit the ground so hard it was cratered. I stood over him. He groaned in pain. That was when Wukong appeared next to me with a pair of handcuffs, warded ones that would keep him from teleporting when we questioned him. The ship lowered down behind us. We got him cuffed as Royce exited the saucer-shaped ship. "We've got the evac 20% done, but we've also got a major." He started just as a shadow suddenly loomed overhead. Wukong and I both looked up into the sky, where the shadow of a massive obsidian pyramid had entered our atmosphere. I could hear the ships above open fire. I could hear our orbital cannons at the compound open fire as well. "We need to hurry," I said. We started to head back to the ship, dragging Thorson up the ramp and inside, where Jericho stood there with his arms crossed. "Well, if it isn't the traitor," Thorson barked. Jericho shrugged. "I don't work for Gehenna. I don't care how much they're willing to pay." Thorson grunted under his breath. "Where's your boss?" he asked. "I know she's here." Jericho had briefed us about the leader of the Banshees on the way over. She was originally from Earth Prime, but she had accidentally been teleported to Earth 5566 during an experiment by the British and American military. Her name was Rhina. How she came to take control of the Banshees was strange. They had originally been started by a rogue lightbender called Ishmael. He'd been on Earth 5566 when Rhina arrived and took her in. Supposedly, they'd become lovers. Then, he'd been killed by a usurper in his sleep. A usurper that she violently killed, which earned the respect of, well, everyone else. Most of the Banshees have some kind of supernatural background, most being demigods, rogue gods, or rogue lightbenders. Rhina is no different. The project she had been part of was the precursor to Operation Lightbringer, an attempt to build multiversal technology. It worked, but centered to the wrong Earth. Before Lightbringer happened, she'd been given mechanical enhancements by a company we were becoming more and more familiar with, Gideon Pharmaceuticals. The mechanical enhancements included a robotic arm that had an assortment of weaponry, a mechanical eyeball whose capabilities we weren't sure about, Her strength and reflexes had been enhanced, obviously. She was dangerous, and not present. That scared us. But we had more pressing problems than Rhina. The ship lifted off the ground. I looked skyward, where the plasma bolts from the fleet and the ground seemingly only glanced off of the pyramid. The thing was so much bigger up close. It truly was the size of a mountain. We were about to start backward toward the Capitol building when Wukong pointed something out. There's a hole forming at the bottom of the pyramid. I looked closer. He was right. The pyramid was still over the water. It was maybe 1,000 feet up and maybe 200 yards away. There were 2 keeper ships firing on it, but none of the ordnances could get through whatever magic barrier they had up. The swarm came forth. A swarm of those massive, mutated hawk wasps. They came after the ships closest to them with a fury. Plasma bolts flew. The creatures couldn't get through the ship's shielding. But it didn't matter. The ships were flying blind due to the mere density of the swarm. It was like watching a black writhing cloud of dog-sized wasps. The swarm started making its way toward us. It was also coming toward the soldiers on the ground at the compound. The men on the walls opened fire. They vanished underneath the cloud. Circe and Royce pulled our ship back, retreating as quickly as we could. We managed to outrun the swarm and found ourselves in Sector 12, which was above Georgia. This is Royce. Argyle, what's the status report?
Keeper Royce, we've got 14 of those pyramids landing on all ends of the continent. 40 more in the sky. We're losing ground fast. Pull back toward the Capitol building.
We're on the way, Roy said. I could hear the screams of the men in Outpost Eagle 1 over comms. Those wasp things had torn them apart quickly. I worried about my wife. She was posted up in the command building, which was going to be hit hard, and we all knew it. We had gotten to Sector 16. That was when we were hit. The impact was hard and sudden. The ship lurched as it soared toward the ground. We crashed into the street. The wreckage was dense. My ears rang as I stumbled from it. Our ship had been split in half. The half I landed in had collided with the building. I fell to my hands and knees. Then I looked back at the building. Wukong was carrying Circe from the wreckage, her hand cupped around a spot on her abdomen, which was seeping blood. "Shit!" I barked as I ran to them. I could see the look in Wukong's eyes as he laid her down. She grimaced in pain. I removed her hand to look at the wound. Something had stabbed her. "Where is everyone else?" I asked. "I don't know." I put my finger to my ear. "Royce, you there?" I demanded. "Royce!" "Argyle, this is Davidstone. Hellhunter ship just went down. We need evac."
"This is Argyle. We're under attack from all sides. We have no resources to spare."
Wukong and I eyed each other. Then came the screech. I turned quickly. We had been in a street that had been lined with multiple skyscrapers on each side. It was a massive hole in the side of one of these glass buildings that I spotted it. I recognized a demon when I saw one. This one had its wings outstretched, and an armored man standing next to him with what looked like some kind of energy bazooka. It was as I looked closer at the demon that I realized who exactly it was. I had seen him at Aberon's banquet. He had white hair and dark, bat-like wings. He smirked at me as the soldier next to him aimed the bazooka at us. "Victor?" I asked. I didn't have much time. I turned and grabbed Wukong and Circe, just as the red beam of energy blew a massive hole in the ground where we were standing. We hit the ground hard, Circe groaning in pain again. That was when all hell broke loose. There was another screech. I looked over my shoulder in the direction where I'd seen Victor, where a horde of crawlers were coming our way. I activated my optic beams and fired them. I cut 100 down in a second, almost clearing the street. Wukong trying to provide medical aid behind me. "We can't stay here," he barked. I was still firing my optic beams at the incoming crawlers. "Hang on," I barked as I turned and grabbed both of them and went skyward. I don't know how far I flew. I landed a few blocks over on the roof of a skyscraper. I channeled my energy into my hand and used it to cauterize Circe's wound. I knew it wouldn't be enough.
Royce, do you copy?
I asked my comlink.
David, are you guys okay?
He asked. No, Circe is down. She needs medical attention. We're going to try to find a teleporter. I'm not sure she can make it though, I said. I could hear Royce exhale.
What's your position?
We're on a tower in Sector 16. The entire sector is overrun. That was when I heard the buzzing. I looked out into the distance. The apocalyptic cloud had caught up to us. I looked at Wukong. We got up and started for the nearest door, which slid open as we approached. We pulled Circe in just as the wasps hit the building. It was dark in the building stairwell, but we continued moving. We could hear them slamming into the door as they tried to get to their prize. Computer, is there a teleporter in here? I asked.
Negative. This building's teleportation unit is offline due to maintenance.
For fuck's sake, I heard Wukong mutter under his breath. There was a loud bang from somewhere lower in the building.
Building integrity compromised. Infected organisms inside.
The computer voice said. Oh shit, I muttered. We carried Circe into a room on a floor that was still relatively high up. We knew we couldn't hide from the wasps forever. Circe was still in a ton of pain, but her wounds weren't bleeding anymore. The building we were in was an office building. We took cover in a small office at the back of a floor filled with cubicles. Royce, where are you guys? I asked.
In the sewers. Those things are everywhere,
he said. Where's the nearest teleporter? I asked.
Nearest operational teleporter is in building 2214.
The computer said. What building is that?
The sanitation office.
Where?
2 blocks south.
I took a deep breath. We couldn't fly there. Our best option would be to get to the bottom of the building. But we weren't sure what all was inside. There were definitely wasps, probably crawlers. My worry was about the new demon-possessed Omega soldiers that Victor was commanding. I had never seen a weapon like the one they'd used to cut through our ship. The thought was disturbing. I wasn't sure what their capabilities were exactly. What other weapons did they have? Were they as dangerous as the 9th? We should try to get to the sewers, Wukong said. I looked at him and nodded. I was thinking the same thing, but we need to get through the building first. We're what, 60 stories up? I asked.
77.
The computer said. Even better, I said. Computer, how many hostiles are in the building? The computer glitched. The building shook again. Wukong pulled several of his hairs out and tossed them. There was a flash. Circe and I found ourselves standing amongst 5 more Wukongs. The main one smiled at us as he pulled his staff from his belt. It extended from a few inches to a few feet. The stairs then? He asked. I shook my head. The elevator. I could hear the buzzing through the walls. The wasps were on this floor. We started moving around. One of the Wukong copies helped Circe to her feet. She was chanting and trying to use a healing magic spell on her wound. I took point as we exited the office. I could hear the doorway to the stairs. It was open. The Wukong copies had formed a circle around Circe. We made our way toward the elevators, which were at the other end of the room, opposite the stairs. We walked towards them, only for the buzzing to suddenly get louder. I turned back to the door right as several wasps came flying through. Get down! I shouted. The Wukongs ducked as I fired my optic beams at the creatures. I cut 2 down, but several more had come barreling through. One of the Wukong copies went on the attack. I watched as he ripped 2 of them apart with his bare hands before taking a stinger to the back. The main Wukong was prying the elevator's doors open. Circe raised her hands and fired a swath of lightning at the horde. It scorched the creatures. Wukong had gotten the elevator open. It's open! He shouted. The idea was to go straight down the shaft. I grabbed Circe. Wukong jumped straight down. I held Circe as we dropped down. We left Wukong's copies to hold the door. The elevator shaft was narrow. We made our way down quickly, eventually coming to the bottom. I looked up just as the wasps came through from the floor we had been on. Wukong had already opened the door, which led to the basement. He and Sirs had exited. I fired my optic beams through the swarm and at the actual elevator, which had been on the top floor. There was an explosion. Then the elevator dropped hard and fast. I stepped out, seeing that Wukong had created 2 more copies, which were shutting the door. There was a loud crash when the elevator landed behind them. Guys, this is the basement, not the sewer, said Sirs. Computer, which wall is the sewer behind? Wukong asked. It's not behind the wall, I said as I looked down and fired my optic beams into the floor. They blasted through, and we were instantly greeted by the sound of running water. I dropped down into the hole first. The water was cold and maybe knee-high. The moment I landed though, I felt cold metal pressed against my head. Don't move, a voice barked. Royce, put the gun down, I groaned. Royce lowered his weapon as Sirs and Wukong dropped behind me. Royce had Jericho and Edwin with him. He'd survived. Jericho had Edwin gripped tightly by the cuffs. Edwin scowled at me. I take it we're headed to the sanitation office? Yeah. The stench in the sewer was awful, but it beat dealing with the wasps. We walked through the shit until we were right underneath the sanitation building. Royce and I looked at each other. Would you like to do the honors? He asked. I smirked and activated my optic beams. The moment I did so, however, there was an explosion a little further down the sewer line. The ground shook. I could see daylight. I looked up and fired my beams, blasting a massive hole in the ceiling above us. Wukong jumped through it with Sirs, Jericho with Edwin. I grabbed Royce by one of the straps on his uniform and went up. The last thing I saw in the sewer were the crawlers lurching in through the hole. We landed inside the sanitation building's first floor. The room was empty for the time being. We knew we needed to move. The teleporters would be on the first floor, but we were in the back of the building. Those were down a long hallway in the front, a long hallway lined with white walls. A hallway we came to an immediate stop once we entered. Several of the armored, possessed soldiers had their weapons aimed at us. My eyes went wide as they opened fire. "Get down!" I shouted as the red beams of energy flew past me. There were 6 of them. I fired my optic beams into the nearest one. They hit him in the chest. It did some damage, knocking the man down, but not enough to kill him. I blitzed forward in a blur, grabbing one and snapping his neck. The beams from their rifles burned, but they didn't do very much damage. I turned to the next one, only for his head to be bashed into a bloody pulp by Wukong. We killed the others quickly. The hallway went silent. That was when I heard the groan. I turned quickly. Jericho was holding Royce up. Royce had a massive hole in his stomach. "Shit!" I shouted as I ran back toward them. Royce grabbed at the hole in his stomach. His eyes were large. Jericho laid him against the wall. He took a deep inhale. Then came the noise from behind us. A loud bang. Then buzzing. Those fucking wasps were coming. He looked down the hall toward the way we'd come. "Go," he said. We don't have to. It's an order," he said, as he produced a plasma grenade from his jacket. "We can't carry him," Wukong said from behind me. "He won't make it to the portal." "Get the fuck out of here," he grunted with the winds. I put my hand on Royce's shoulder and gave him a reassuring squeeze. Then we got up and continued. We had gotten out of the hallway and rounded the corner. I could see the teleporter now. Of the 3 that were there, only 1 wasn't damaged. The other 2 sparked and popped with electricity on approach. They were set up against the wall. We were less than 20 feet away. Sirs was first up. The teleporter scanned her. "Designation: Keeper Sirs. Location: Command Building." She stepped inside the cylinder. There was a flash, and she was gone. Next was Wukong. "Designation: Keeper Wukong. Location: Command Building." Another flash. The buzzing was louder now. There was an explosion in the hallway. "Designation: Prisoner Edwin Thorson. Location: Command Building." Another flash. Jericho and I were the only ones left. The buzzing was even louder. I turned. The wasps came forth with their black shiny bodies. I fired my optic beams at them, cutting several to bits while the teleporter scanned Jericho.
Designation: Keeper Jericho. Location: Command Building.
Another bright flash. I backed up a few steps. The teleporter had started to scan me, but the swarm was closer. I roared as I fired my optic beams, zipping them across the room, cutting into the swarm.
Designation: Keeper Captain David Stone. Location: Command Building.
I stepped inside while still firing. There was a bright flash. And then, I fell out of the teleporter. I'd fallen out of the teleporter that was just outside of the command room. I looked up at the keeper boots that were in front of me. Then, the outstretched hand. I took it and found myself looking into the face of Keeper Captain Iroh. "Hello, Stone. Your wife and I had a fun conversation this morning." "Really? That's what you're worried about?" I asked. The tall black man smirked. "Where's Royce?" he asked. I shook my head. I could see Iroh's face falter a bit. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked around. There were medics attending to Circe. Jericho was handing off Edwin to 2 exterminators. There were explosions outside. The building shook. Everyone around me looked miserable underneath the flickering lights. "How are things with the evacuation?" I asked. Iroh sighed. "Come with me." He led me into the command room. General Argyle was directing our forces. I could see a holographic projection of the command building and the surrounding city in the middle of the room. The building was surrounded by a constant swarm of crawlers. There were wasps all over the surrounding buildings, but they weren't airborne. Above us, the remaining ships fired into the hordes of hell. I could see the image of the Leviathan as it snaked around in our atmosphere. "We've lost half our forces. We still have thousands to evacuate," Iroh said sternly. Argyle finished giving an order and turned to me. I could see the annoyance in his eyes. "What's the snake doing?" I asked. "It's up there protecting the other 40-some-odd pyramids. Something tells me they're saving those for Earth Prime." I groaned. "Where's my wife?" "Up top with Gabriel. We have another major problem though." "What?" I asked. "Outpost 52 is down, which means..." "Shit," I barked. Outpost 52 was special. It was across the planet and heavily defended. Or it was, until the evacuation order began. We'd never thought Gehenna would be dumb enough to launch an actual invasion on this planet with their actual armies. Had we been at full force and not under attack from their new forces, we'd have stonewalled them at this Earth's monolith. They're still most of the way across the planet, but depending on who's leading that force, there's a chance they could just teleport here, Argyle said. "Well, they can't teleport straight to the command building. Not with the warding." "That's the other problem," Argyle started. "What?" "Why do you think Gabriel is on the roof? Someone inside the building broke the warding the moment the shields went down. Gabriel is trying to put it back together." I looked at Iroh. "Rhina," I said. I took a deep breath and looked over at Argyle. His old eyes narrowed. "I need you to find Rhina." I nodded as I turned and started to walk away. I made it out of the command room, where I found Wukong waiting for me. Iroh walked out behind me. I could see Wukong glare at him for a moment. "Jericho, rally up at the shield generators and have them bring Thorson," I said. "Shield generator?" asked Wukong. "I need somewhere quiet to interrogate. Before everything, before I died saving my daughter, before I participated in the rebellion in Hell and the multiversal fighting tournament, I was the lead interrogator for the CIA's Supernatural Operations Division, or SNOD for short. It wasn't something that I was proud of. I was a torturer, a good one. I'd done it to hundreds of vampires. I'd broken the strongest of them. I'd grown a reputation amongst them. I was good at getting information. But I'd never tortured a demigod before. Something told me it wouldn't work. Jericho had Thorson on his knees in the generator room when we walked in. I looked down at him as I walked in. Thorson had a massive smile on his face. He knew what information we wanted. "You won't stop her," he said. "Stop her from what?" I asked. I look over the man. He was broad and muscular. He also had scars all over his arms. He was no stranger to pain. I squatted in front of him. My eyes met his. "Destroying this city." "She's already destroyed the city. Where is she?" He shrugged. I channeled some energy into my index finger and touched his head. I could hear the flesh sizzle. He didn't show any indication of pain. He only smiled at me. "It's going to take a bit more than that to break me," he said. I shrugged myself. I figured. "Sirs?" Sirs appeared next to me. Her wounds had been bandaged up. She looked down at the rogue demigod. "Scramble his eggs a bit." He gave me a confused glance. "Oh, she's going to fish the answer from your head. Now usually, she'd be gentle and leave your mind intact while she does it. But I don't have that kind of time. And your attack led directly to my friend's death. Meaning after she's done, you'll be nothing but an empty husk incapable of doing anything but drooling on the carpet." I motioned for Sirs to continue. I could see the fear in his eyes. "Wait! You gonna talk?" I asked. Her assignment was to set up lightbender portals so Paul could come through with Abaddon's army. "Where?" I asked. 2 streets south." I looked at Wukong. "Argyle, aye." There was a massive explosion outside. The building shook again. "That's not good," Iroh said as he looked at his wrist. A holographic image of the battle appeared. There was a devastator in the street cutting down swaths of crawlers. But there was simply too many. They were like ants piling on a sandwich. "Argyle, I have Rhina's location. She's 2 blocks south. We need to take her out before the actual Gehennan military shows up."
"Demos, you take a squad and escort the Hellhunters,"
Argyle's voice said from up top.
"Yes, sir. Meet at the entrance."
My squad and I made our way upstairs. We left Edwin with the Keepers and Sirs and Jericho. I could see the battle outside. The exterminators and the damned had created a nice perimeter against the Lazarus crawlers. I admit, I wondered why the wasps weren't attacking, rather staying back and trying to keep us contained in the evac building. I can remember thinking that something wasn't right. The perimeter was strong. Demos in his bulky 11-foot frame waited for us, along with another devastator. He rallied several exterminators and a Hellcat, which was a massive robotic vehicle that walked on 4 thick metal legs. They had plasma weaponry and were manned by members of the damned. We also had one of the fleet saucers overhead. "Get in the Hellcat," I commanded Iroh and Wukong. I could see Wukong give Iroh a funny look. "We ain't got no time for pseudo-racism, guys. Get in the fucking Hellcat." They did as told. I turned to Demos, who raised a bushy brow at me. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. We started our movement. We'd gone out the east side of the building. The battle was raging on all sides. The streets around us were narrow. It was maybe 100 yards to Rhina's supposed location. I knew we didn't have a lot of time. I went skyward. "Tell your pilots to scan the destination," I said.
"Roger."
I went straight into the air, leveling myself so I could see down the street. The wasps had blanketed the buildings. The crawlers poured in. I watched closely.
"We see a clearing."
The pilot in the ship next to me said. I narrowed my eyes. I could see it too, a circle in the horde, where a reddish-yellow portal opened up. A corrupted lightbender portal. "Shit," I barked. I could see the woman in a squat standing around it. My eyes started to glow as my optic beams charged up. That was when a red beam of energy sliced the keeper ship next to me in half. I turned and looked to my left, right as another red beam came my direction. I barely managed to dodge it. The new guard members were being directed by Victor himself. They were inside a tall building to my left. I fired my beams at them, but the hole in the wall was suddenly closed by the wasp swarms. That was when I realized why exactly the wasps weren't moving around. Abaddon's new guard had taken positions all around us. I looked down at the squad. They'd already began their push. The Devastator led the way with its rapid-fire plasma weaponry. "Demos, pull back!" I shouted as the wreckage of the Keeper ship hit the ground next to them. I could see the rows of Gahinian soldiers exiting the portal ahead of me, their black armor and white skin glinting in the sunlight. My eyes widened. I blitzed forward, firing my optic beams as I did so. Several were cut down. I landed in front of the portal, cutting several of their lines to bits as they passed through. Rhina opened fire on me with an Atlantean weapon. I turned to her. I could see the hatred in her eyes. I didn't have time for this. I turned back to the portal, my eyes scanning for the cubes that had created it. I found them quickly. I readied myself to fire, but something flew through the portal at a speed that was faster than I was ready for. It slammed into me, sending me tumbling through the crawlers, which swarmed me. I slashed with my arms, both glowing with the angelic essence pumping through my veins. I could hear the gunfire from all around me. I eventually fought my way out of the swarm, finding myself face to face with my assailant. It was a demon, a powerful demon whose file I'd read a few times. A crowned prince of hell with blood-red skin and two massive, dragon-like wings. He wielded a massive axe and had two obsidian horns protruding from his head. He smiled at me with a mouth full of shark-like teeth. "Baal," I growled. "Rebel," he greeted. The body I'd been given was made to fight archdemons. I'd fought archdemons. I'd fought dukes and barons. I'd fought hellspawn. Hell, I traded blows with the king. He had destroyed me. I'd fought a powered-up queen. She'd put me in recovery for a month. A crowned prince was something I'd never actually fought. I wasn't sure what to be ready for. I readied myself for a fight. He charged forward, bringing his axe down hard on my head. I sidestepped and jabbed him in the throat with a glowing fist. This did nothing but piss him off. He swung his axe again, catching me in the chest. I flew into a building. I could see through the hole I'd left as he gave his orders. "Take the building," he commanded as he turned back to me. I could see the Gahinian soldiers marching down the street behind him. I could hear Argyle on comms.
"The wasps are engaging. We're taking fire from all directions."
I didn't have time to lament on this as Baal was coming, his axe gripped tightly in his hands. I rocketed forward, slamming into him. We both flew out of the building and into the street. I could hear the Hellcat and Devastator fighting to my left. I let loose a flurry of punches, slamming my fist into Baal's head over and over again, cratering the concrete underneath him. He roared at me as we struggled. I stopped punching and activated my optic beams, sending them right into his face as I went skyward. But the moment I did so, the wasps were upon me, an entire swarm of them. Their stingers were trying to penetrate my flesh. It didn't work. I ripped as many apart as I could. Then something hit me in the back hard. I flew to the ground, impacting hard on my stomach. I spun just as Baal brought his axe down. I fired my beams. The obsidian blade exploded before I brought them down on his face. He was knocked off of me. I started to stand again. I was angry now. I wanted to rip this thing to shreds. I was about to go after him when the voice came through.
"Stone, we need help,"
it cried. I turned. I could see the Hellcat was underneath a pile of wasps and crawlers. There was a Wukong copy on the ground, writhing as a smaller wasp ripped its way out of its torso. I could see the real Wukong smack a Gahinian soldier with his staff. Demos was on top of a Gahinian knight as he pummeled it to death with one of his fists. He looked up and raised a bulky plasma pistol, gunning down two wasps, and then another Gahinian soldier. A scream echoed out. I watched as a wasp ripped Iroh from inside the vehicle. Its stinger penetrated his stomach before it flew off. I flew forward into the melee. Iroh was hurt bad. I pulled him to his feet while using my optic beams to clear out as many hostiles as I could. Iroh fired his pistol behind me. We were on top of the Hellcat. Wukong jumped up with us, pulling more hairs out and tossing them. More Wukongs joined the fray. "There are too many of them," Wukong shouted. He wasn't wrong. We were surrounded by pike-wielding Gahinian demons, crawlers, wasps, and I watched as a red energy beam sliced Demos in half. Shit! I shouted as I pulled both Wukong and Iroh's off the top of the Hellcat. We landed on the ground nearby. Another beam hit the Hellcat. It went up in a massive explosion. Then, another beam from a different direction cut the Devastator in two. The three of us were on the road now. I was on my hands and knees, my ears ringing. Iroh was writhing on his back. White foam poured from his mouth as he grabbed at his chest. The ringing stopped. There was the sound of flesh being torn. Iroh screamed as the baby wasp ripped its way from his chest, only to be smashed by Wukong's staff. Shit, I grunted. Wukong was on his knees. He turned and looked at me. Then behind me, I turned too. Victor stood there with Baal, flanked on either side by both Kahinan soldiers and the new guard. Weapons were aimed at us, too many to fight. Surrender, we'll make your deaths quick, Baal said. Victor eyed him. No, kill the monkey. We need the other one, he said. I grunted under my breath as I got to my feet, both my arms glowing. Wukong did as well. We knew we couldn't surrender here. There was too much at stake. I wasn't about to let them kill my friend. Oh, come on now, David. This isn't personal. Think of your daughter. Do you really want her to go on without a father? Victor asked. I readied myself for a fight, getting in a stance. I was exhausted. My limbs hurt. My back hurt. Everything ached. But I wasn't gonna stop. That was when I heard the sound. It was faint at first. A call on the comms.
Civilian evac is complete. I need all staff to begin evac,
Argyle's voice said. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'd hoped Anna had gone with them. That was when another realization hit me. Wukong and I weren't going to make it out. We looked at each other. Perhaps he realized this as well. We couldn't fly. There were too many wasps above us. David, Wukong said. What? You can get out of here, Wukong said again. The wasps can't kill you. You can run, he said. No, I'm not leaving you, I said. That was when I heard something else. I turned and smirked. Then I looked at Victor. You hear that? I asked. Victor cocked his head to the side. Then his eyes grew large with realization. Hear what? Asked Baal. Trumpets. Gabriel's trumpet blared loudly. A cascade of yellow energy beams filled the sky, torching swaths of wasps. Beams that could only have come from one source. The Seraphim. I grabbed Wukong and went skyward, breaking the sound barrier as we did so, flying as fast as we could back toward the tower. I could see the outer perimeter had been overwhelmed. Gabriel stood on the roof with his trumpet in hand. I could see the 4 Seraphim surrounding the building. They were massive, human-sized eyeballs that had 4 wings each, and were firing yellow beams so powerful that anything within 20 yards of the beam caught fire. They cleared out the skies quickly. I lowered Wukong down next to Gabriel, who looked at me in surprise. I was afraid you were dead, Gabriel said. They tried. Where's my wife? I asked. Inside with the staff evac. Good. Get your ass down there, Gabriel said sternly. What are you gonna do? I asked. The teleporter needs to be destroyed when you leave. I can make my way back to heaven on my own. Are you sure? I asked. Gabriel smiled softly at me. I nodded as Wukong and I made our way downstairs. The big teleporter was monolithic in nature. It was more of a portal than the teleporters around the city. It led straight to the moon base near Earth Prime. It was in a massive room with one big entrance. It was right down the hallway from the control room. We found a contingent of what was left of the damned standing guard. I could hear the gunfire outside as the hordes of hell were at the doorways now. Most of the staff had evacuated, all aside from Anna, who stood at the mouth of the portal with Circe and Jericho, who was hulked out in his demon form. David? She called out as I approached. She ran to me and hugged me tightly. I looked down at her and the rest of my team. Why are you guys here? You should have left. We were waiting for you. Now, let's... Jericho was interrupted by gunfire inside the room. I turned as several of Abaddon's new guardsmen entered, firing their weapons. They gunned down the damned and exterminators in the room with us. Jericho didn't hesitate. He charged in at them, grabbing the first by his head and slamming him into the next. Then a third fired. The blaster blew a massive hole in Jericho's chest. Then another. Then another. The demon-possessed vampire went limp as he fell to the ground. I fired my beams at him. It knocked the man down, but more came into the room, firing their weapons. Circe sprang into action, letting loose a hail of lightning. Several of our assailants were electrocuted inside their armor. We knew we couldn't let these guys into the portal. Gabriel, they're inside. I barked on comms.
We have to hold the portal,
he commanded. Gabriel suddenly appeared ahead of us. He had a glowing sword in one hand. The possessed Omega soldiers ahead of us kept their blasters aimed. The room quickly filled with them. Victor stood in the back with Paul. I think I noticed Rhina in there as well. I thought you were going to destroy the portal, I asked. The portal has to be shut first. Now go, he growled as he sprang into action. He cut down several before I could blink, tearing a path of carnage through the horde of hell. I grabbed Anna and took her through the portal with me, Wukong and Circe following as well. We arrived inside the main hangar bay of the moon base, where we found Marcus standing there with several members of the 9th, who had their own plasma weapons raised. Close the portal, I shouted. Marcus signaled someone. The white glowing monolith started to power down, but not before one last twist of fate as a gunshot rang out. Rhina came through with a pistol raised. Circe's head snapped forward as she crumpled to the ground. Marcus was suddenly in Rhina's face, one hand around her throat and the other snapping her gun wrist. He then slammed her into the ground just as the portal finished closing. I looked down upon Circe's deceased corpse. A pool of blood formed around her head. I wanted to get up and murder Rhina. I stood and turned to where she was being cuffed, my optic beams activating, only for a hand to fall on my shoulder. David, don't do it. We need to interrogate her, Wukong's voice said. I took a deep breath, then turned to look at my wife. Then Marcus. He looked tired. We all looked tired. The civilians who had gotten out stood around us, all covered in ash and grime. There was a serious mood in the air. The hell hunters were gone. Less than half of us remained. But there was something else in Marcus's eyes. It was sadness. I didn't want to ask yet. I wanted to see my daughter and hold both her and my wife. We need to debrief you. I'll give you some time, Marcus said softly. Gabriel appeared behind us. His sword and armor were covered in blood. He knelt down and took a deep breath, then looked at us. I'm sorry. She slipped through when I was facing Baal. Did you at least kill him? I asked. That body is no longer functional. Neither is the teleporter. The next few hours went by slowly. There was a silence. I got to shower. I had a few cuts and scrapes. I found myself sitting under the shower faucet for a while. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cry. I thought of Royce, Circe, and Jericho. Of the 5 members of our team, we'd lost 3. We'd lost Earth 0067. After the shower, I made my way into the briefing room. I found it empty. It was an office room, a table with 3 chairs on one side and a chair for me on the other. Marcus, Abel, and Michael would be debriefing me shortly. I sat down and waited for them. That was when Father Time appeared in front of me. Hello, David, he said softly. I eyed him. He took a deep breath and looked at the desk. I'm sorry about your team. He took a deep breath again. I know you don't want to hear this, but their deaths weren't wasted. What do you know about death, my friend? You're a deathless being, I asked. He scoffed and smiled. Everything ends with time. Friend. Why are you here? I asked. He seemed to think about this. Then he mumbled something. I have to stop the cycle. No, this isn't the right way, he whispered. What? I asked. He gathered his senses and looked up at me. I wanted to give you my condolences, he said, before he vanished. I sat there in confusion. That was when the door opened. My 3 debriefers walked in. The mood in the room was tense. They had me walk them through the events of the day, everything leading up to our abandonment of Earth 0067. Once the questioning was over, I stared them down. Can we go see my daughter now? I asked. That won't be necessary, Michael said sternly. What? Why? I started as flashes of anger passed through me. David, calm down. Let us explain, Marcus said. She's here, as is my daughter and Owen Knight, Michael explained. I narrowed my eyes. What, Trent decided he didn't want to babysit anymore after Ophelia had hers? I asked with a semi-smile. No one else smiled. That was when I knew something very bad had happened. Trent and Ophelia have been captured, said Abel. What? I asked. Michael sighed. We're coordinating with the ISDD to get them back, but we don't know where they're being held. Which brings me to my next point. David, we need you on standby. For what? Marcus took a deep breath. For when all hell breaks loose.